This is America's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., an initiative of the U.S.-based think tank International Leaders Summit in partnership with Lancer Broadcasting Corporation and SuperTalk Mississippi Media. Thank you for joining us on America's Roundtable. I'm Joel Anand, your co-host, joined by economist Natasha Srdoc, co-founder of International Leaders Summit and the Jerusalem Leaders Summit.
America's Roundtable guests include leading voices from business, government, media, energy, technology, healthcare, and the broad policy arena. Subscribe to America's Roundtable on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and Spotify. Visit America's Roundtable at americasrt.com. americasrt.com. Welcome to America's Roundtable.
We're truly delighted to have Troy Miller, president of the National Religious Broadcasters, speaking to us about the future of America's public policy, First Amendment, freedom of speech, and religious liberty. Troy, it's great to have you joining us on America's Roundtable today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
From your vantage point, Troy, what is the state of free speech in America, and what do you see as major headwinds impacting our First Amendment?
Well, I think all you have to do is look at some of the recent comments made by some past and current politicians, who've made comments like Hillary Clinton's, who said that the, First Amendment is an impediment to power and messaging, and the current climate czar, who's also made that same statement. So look at that, and then look what the government's been doing. Look at the issue. I think we really got a peek inside or behind the curtain when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and we had the release of the Twitter files. And then all of a sudden, we really saw exposed the collusion that has been going on between the social media companies and the government to really suppress and control speech and control the messaging. So the weaponization that's gone on in the federal government system against free speech in particular, and against people's own conscience. I mean, look at some of the candidates now. One of the candidates who said, there will be no religious exemptions coming forward. So we just see it coming from all sides. And I think we live in a time, and I don't know of a time that I ever lived in where somebody actually spelled out that the First Amendment, the foundation of the Constitution, the rights that the founding fathers understood were inalienable rights. They were rights not granted to us by the government, but they were rights that we had as individual human beings and citizens of the country. And the First Amendment was for the government to recognize those rights, not for the government to authorize or to give those rights out, but to have somebody to say that the First Amendment now is outdated and it needs to go in order for us to be able to, and the word was, in order for us to be able to have complete or total control of the messaging in this country. Now that sounds an awful lot like a dictatorial, totalitarian state to me, and not the America that we all know and have grown up in and come to love.
Troy, on behalf of NRB, you joined with the Christian ministry groups and houses of worship in Texas and the Commonwealth of Virginia to file a complaint challenging the Johnson Amendment's restrictions on nonprofit organizations, including churches. Why is this so important for the community of faith going forward?
So let's just to get a little history here so everybody knows what the Johnson Amendment is. So Lyndon B. Johnson, then running for Senate in Texas, was actually opposed by a number of churches. And they were actually a number of African-American churches that were worried about his stance on civil rights. And so when he was elected, when he actually won that election, he came out and added this amendment to a bill that was already going through Congress. It was in what's called the reconciliation phase. And he added an amendment to this bill that has come to be known as Johnson Amendment. It said three things. One, 501c3 organizations that are granted tax exemption status. Now, that's not tax exemption just to the organization. That means that the gifts given to that organization, the donations given to that organization in churches, those donations are tax exempt, and the donors can claim that on their tax forms to say, I have given this out. So that's the form. It said three things. One, that those tax exempt organizations couldn't donate to candidates for office, and we don't have a problem with that. But two, it said that those organizations could not support or oppose candidates for office. And then the third piece of that was to limit the amount of lobbying that tax-exempt organizations could do. So we're okay with number one and number three. We say that's okay. But it's number two, the fact that it silenced any 501c3 organization, including churches, even though they don't have a 501c3 designation from the IRS, because churches are tax exempt through the Constitution and through the First Amendment, but it silenced those pastors. So think about this. For over 175 years of this country, pastors across this country were able to speak out about cultural issues, about candidates that were running, and where candidates stood on those cultural issues. And then comes Lyndon B. Johnson along. He's upset with that. He kind of hides it underneath this, oh, we're trying to quiet these communist organizations. And he passes it without any real vote of Congress. It gets through as an amendment. And the churches have been silenced ever since. It's held over their head. So we have decided that this has gone on too long. We're taking the IRS to court, along with the three groups that you talked about, the churches and the organizations, to say this needs to stop. We need to go back. Pastors should have the freedom that they had in this country for over 175 years to speak out on issues that are important to them and important to our faith. Our Christian worldview isn't just for the four walls of the church. Our Christian worldview is meant to impact culture.
In fact, as you mentioned so rightfully, Troy, about the impact and the role of Christians in America, and Christians have stood with Israel in a significant manner with such strength and prayer and encouragement. We certainly remember October 7, 2023, when the Hamas terrorists backed by Iran invaded Israel. 1,200 individuals were killed, 240 hostages taken into Gaza, and we still have 7 Americans kept in Gaza by the Hamas. And we also have Iran attacking Israel. Now, Troy, you were in Israel. You met with leaders in Israel after October 7. What was your experience there, and what is your message to Christians in America, and especially the youth that are somewhat confused about what's going on due to the impact of social media?
Just to remind everybody, as you said about the hostages, that's where our prayers are. The hostages should be brought home unconditionally. Remember that Hamas is holding all the way from 5-year-olds up until seniors in here. And these people should be brought home unconditionally. And that should be the only policy position that the U.S. has on that. Until the hostages are brought home, there is no other negotiation. So look, we went to Israel. We did 2 trips to Israel, one in December, one in May. They were solidarity and information gathering trips. But here's the experience. This is what went on. We went down to the villages and to the kibbutz that were hit the hardest on October 7th. We met with people there, and I'll tell you, one of the things that shocked them, because if you don't know anything about these areas, it's a very liberal area of Israel. The kibbutz are kind of what, for people in the U.S., might think of the communes of the 70s here. So lots of people in there. Their whole policy was to befriend the Palestinians in Gaza, and that would be the thing that really changed the game there. And of course, October 7th came around, and they found out that none of that worked. They were betrayed. They had maps of all people that worked in their towns, had maps of all the towns and all kinds of things. But here's what our message has been to the Israeli people, that there are hundreds of churches, thousands of churches across America that are praying for you individually as people. They're praying for the government. They're praying for wisdom. We're praying for peace. And that the American Christian church by large stands shoulder to shoulder with our Israeli and Jewish brothers and sisters. And that's a message that they have taken to heart. I can tell you that we were at several different rabbis' houses. Some of those rabbis were what they call Reformed rabbis. So these are very progressive, very left. And you know what he said to us? He said, here you guys are. We were actually there the last night of Hanukkah. And he said, here you guys are, evangelical Christians, conservative evangelicals, who we're probably on opposite sides of all the social issues that are out there. And you're in my house, you're praying for me, And my liberal colleagues in America have abandoned me. They have forgotten me. They have left us behind. That has not escaped the people in Israel, both the Jewish people in Israel and the Jewish people here in the U.S. Now, let's talk about these colleges for a second. So, look, we've had all this indoctrination going on. Critical race theory, intersectionality, all of these things that are going on, and they've really the indoctrination is so deep that they boiled everything down to you're either the oppressor or you're the oppressed. That's the two sides of it there is. There's no other thing. In Israel, one of the most oppressed nations in history, okay, somehow is the oppressor and the colonialist and the aggressor in all of this, even though they were the ones that have been always pursuing peace. And that has then now bubbled into this anti-Semitism that I think was always underneath the surface. And by the way, not only anti-Semitism, but also an anti-Christian movement as well. They realized, just like the Hamas, that the Jewish people and Israel, they're the little Satan, but the big Satan is America and the Christian church here. And so that's bubbled over, and these kids have been indoctrinated, and we have to get that. We have to continue to get the truth out there. I met with a whole group of kids here in Nashville that were protesting this. And when I really drilled them down, do you even know what river you're talking about when you say the river and the sea? They didn't know what river they're talking about. They don't know what the land is. They don't know that the West Bank is Judea and Samaria. This is a land that Jesus walked, ministered in, and preached in. This is the land that the Jewish people was given to them by God 3,000 years ago. They don't even understand that. They think that the Palestinians were there. So we have to keep speaking up. And one of the things we're trying to do is change the whole language of the support of Israel and talk about what the truth really is. We can't quit talking about the truth.
Troy, as president of the National Religious Broadcasters, you have joined, for example, former Governor Mike Huckabee, Dr. Ben Carson, and others on broadcast media in communicating about the concerns of 32 million registered voters who are not participating in the electoral process. What is your message to pastors? What is your message to these 32 million Christians that deeply care about our country, and that's what they say, but do not participate on Election Day?
So my message to pastors first and foremost is Jesus gave us the Lord's Prayer. And in the Lord's Prayer, he said to us, he said to pray that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what is God's greater will than to have the righteous to govern, the righteous people to govern this country, not to give this country over to people who want to move away from the morality and the ideology and the worldview that we hold. So why would we want to shy away from that if we're pastors from the pulpit, even if the government holds a threat over us? Thank goodness the Black Coat, what they were called was a Black Coat Regiment of the Revolution, didn't care about what the British government said they could or couldn't do. They preached about the freedom that should go in this country and the conscience that they would have there. So pastors need to stand up. They need to be bold. They need to talk about the worldview. They need to talk about the key cultural issues and not be afraid. Politics is not a thing to shy away from. It's a thing for us as the church to lean into. And if you're out there as a citizen, to think about it this way, who would you rather have govern you? And this is all about governance. This is not a personality test. This is not about who's the better character or not character. This is about the governance of the country. Who's going to govern the country? Who's going to appoint people that think like you do, that hold the same values that you do, the same principles that you do, and the same morals that you do? So if you want to give that over to people that hold all the opposite that you do, then stay at home. But realize what you're doing. You are giving up and giving it over to people that are going to marginalize you and eventually persecute you. And so we say, look, it is our God-given right and gift in this country, something that most people in Christianity have never had, the ability to choose the people that's going to govern them. And think about that over the next 7 days when you think about sitting on the sidelines.
Thank you so much, Troy, for your important conversation that you've just had with us, your presentation of facts and realities that we should take into consideration. Troy Miller is the president of the National Religious Broadcasters, and they have over 1,100 members and media groups that are certainly doing the great work in presenting the gospel message and communicating truth to a country that certainly is seeking the way, the truth, and the life. So thank you, Troy, for joining us.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you for having me.
This is America's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., an initiative of the U.S.-based think tank International Leaders Summit in partnership with Lancer Broadcasting Corporation and SuperTalk Mississippi Media. Thank you for joining us on America's Roundtable. I'm Joel Adensami, your co-host, joined by economist Natasha Srdoc, co-founder of International Leaders Summit and the Jerusalem Leaders Summit.
America's Roundtable guests include leading voices from business, government, media, energy, technology, healthcare, and the broad policy arena. Subscribe to America's Roundtable on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and Spotify. Visit America's Roundtable at americasrt.com. americasrt.com.